Hello, Chris here. In the next few videos, we are going to discuss UVs and creating UVs and unwrapping UVs for 3D models. Before we do that, we need to understand two fundamental questions. And to kick us off with that, the first question is, what are UVs? And the answer to that, to put it simply, is UVs are 2D coordinates that represent 3D models. The second question is, why do we need UVs? And the answer to that question is we need UVs so that we can texture our models. This cube right here has a default material attached to it, and a material controls how light impacts the surface of a model to give us the illusion that it has color or height or opacity or some sort of variable roughness to it. I have another cube. Let's delete this one and let's use this one, and you can see that I've applied a texture to this cube, a stone brick texture, right? So if we want to be able to texture our objects, to be able to make them look like something, we need to be able to UV unwrap them. To UV unwrap an object, you need to know how to get to the UV editor. There are a few ways to do that. You can go to UV editor, and it will open up the UV editor here. You can also click on this UV editor shortcut in the poly modeling shelf. Or you can change your workspace from Maya Classic to UV editing. If you do that, you will have multiple panels. The first panel will be your perspective camera, or whatever camera you want to show by changing it here. And the second panel will be the UV editor, and you'll have the UV toolkit on the far right hand side. We already know how to navigate this viewport over here. The UV editor, you can navigate it in a very similar fashion. The scroll wheel zooms in and out. You can also hold Alt and right click and drag, and that will zoom in and out. And then if you hold Alt and middle mouse click and drag, you can pan around. Notice that this is a 2D grid, right, or graph. And that makes sense because UVs are 2D coordinates. UVs will not show up in here for an object unless that object is selected. So if I want to see the UVs for this object, I need to select it. And there it is. Here are the UVs. These UVs are the default UVs that come with a cube. On the right hand side, we have the UV toolkit. Up top, we have various components of UVs that we can go into different component modes, right? So here's vertex, edge, face, UV, and UV shell. I go to component modes in the same way that I do with polygons, and that is I just use the marking menu. So if I hold down the right mouse button, I can get the marking menu again, and I can change from UV, face, vertex, edge, or shell in the same way that I would over here to go to edge or face or vertex. Here we have different selection techniques, symmetry, selection constraints, transform constraints, and then a lot of drop-down menus to help you control, manage, and edit your UVs. Before we move on to the next video, let's talk a little bit about the grid here. And mainly what you should know is that in the workflow that I'm going to teach for now, all of your UV shells, a UV shell is one contiguous set of UVs like this, and we'll learn more about that in a future video. All of them should fit inside the one-to-one space. The one-to-one space is this first grid space right here. You can tell that you're in the one-to-one space by there's the green line here and the red line here, and if you look at these numbers, right, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, this goes up in the positive all the way up to 1. And then we go to the right in the positive all the way up to 1. So if we were to go in any other direction, we'd be going in the negative, this way or that way. Once we go beyond 1, the textures will begin to repeat themselves. So we will be working in this one-to-one space. So when I refer to the one-to-one space, this is what I'm referring to, is this one-to-one space here. If you have one monitor that you are working on, I prefer to use the UV editing workspace. If you have more than one monitor, sometimes I find it nice to move the UV editor by going to UV editor and putting it on the other monitor. It's up to you how you would like to work. Alright, I'm going to go back to my classic for a moment to illustrate something. So UVs, when you're modeling an object, UVs are not nice and tidy by default to a point where you could apply a texture like this. So for example, here is a flashlight model. It's not done yet. It has not been UV unwrapped. This was created through several cylinders and a sphere, along with some other techniques to get holes in the mesh. So if I went ahead and attempted to apply that material to this entire object, this is what I'm getting, right? So tons of stretching and distortion, variation, and the size of the brick, right? Let's look at the UVs for this model. So here are the UVs for this model. Notice how there's a lot of twisting and bending, and this doesn't make a lot of sense, especially in comparison to the cube that we could easily visualize in terms of how it would wrap back up and create the cube. So our goal within the next couple of lessons is to understand how to take a model that we've been working on and then accurately and efficiently unwrap it so that we can texture it. If I look at another model, let's look at this fire hydrant here. This fire hydrant has a lot of pieces and extrusions, and if I look at the UVs for this fire hydrant, you can see that everything has been unwrapped, and all of the UV shells, each one of these pieces, which is a contiguous set of UVs, they're all fitting inside this one-to-one space, and they're all organized, and none of them are maybe this one a little bit. None of them are touching the edge. It might look like it when we're zoomed out, but they're not touching the edge, and they're also not touching each other, right? So we're trying to figure out how do we get from that gobbledygook mess that was the flashlight to an organized set of UVs like this that is the fire hydrant. And we will begin that journey in the next video. Thank you.